Welcome to Soberish Uprising. My name is Holly Crevo, a former heavy drinker who started a Soberish Uprising of her own, and everything in her life changed. On the Soberish Uprising, we tell stories of trusting the knowing inside of us that's telling us we deserve better than the current consumption that we're using with alcohol, right? That we deserve more. It's stories of sobriety, of being sober-ish, but at the end of the day, of finding freedom and building the trust in ourselves to want to do something different for our lives. Today continues a series that I'm doing, the 4 myths that held me back from changing my relationship with alcohol. The first 2 was I don't have a problem. I Now's not the right time. And the third one is drinking is a part of who I am. And this is one that I didn't know was so strong until I got closer to redefining my relationship. And then honestly, until I was like really in it, right? It has been around 560-ish days since I'm looking on my calendar since I started this sober journey. And it still blows my mind that I'm not a drinker. I don't consider myself a drinker anymore. Do I have drinks every once in a while? Yes. Do I consider myself a drinker? No. And that just is mind blowing because for so many years, it was a part of who I was. It was in what I saw around me. It was embedded in what I did. And so when I started to think about making that change, it was really scary, right? Because if I'm not a drinker, then who am I? Right. And we're also in a society that normalizes that. And so when I started to think about changing, it felt like I was going to be missing a piece of me, that I would have to give up a piece of myself that I not necessarily was shameful of, right? The piece of that, but the actions I had were not serving me well, right? So I knew I would have to give that up. And so again, it still blows my mind that I'm not a drinker. That was an identity I held to that people knew that I felt a little bit of pride in, right? I'm always up for a good time. I'm always up for this. And I'll talk about how that didn't change. But that was one thing that really stopped me. And I love this definition that I found of identity. And it says, it encompasses the memories, the experiences, the relationships, and values that create oneself. Again, it encompasses the memories, the experiences, the relationships, and values that creates oneself. So it makes total sense that when our identity starts to go away or shift, that would be scary. So I want to talk about 3 areas that came up for me that I worked through around this identity piece. One was misinterpreting me being a drinker with what was really going on, right? Um, years I spent defining myself as a drinker, going to happy hours, weddings I would drink, lunches I would drink. It was such a big part of what I was doing. And I think when we're in this place, we confuse the booze with the experience, right? We start to think the only time I can have fun at a wedding or at a happy hour is if I drink, or that was and it was like the piece of it, but it wasn't the piece of it. I'm sorry. It was a piece of it. It wasn't the piece, right? So going to the weddings, we start to think, oh, I only have fun when I drink, right? And you're like, no, I had fun because I was with the people I loved. And it can be hard to separate when you're so in it. When you can't separate, like, I don't know that I've ever gone to watch a football game at a bar, not had a drink, right? So will it be fun? But starting to realize, like, it wasn't the drink. It wasn't the drink that helped me relax at the day. It wasn't the drink that I enjoyed at lunch. It wasn't the drink at the happy hour. It was the experiences and the memories that we talk about that come with the identity that were the piece of it. And that was really big, right? Because we start to think and we like don't see totally clearly that, oh, it's not that I have a drink at the barbecue. It's that I'm with my friends and there's laughter and there's joy. Like that's what it's about. And so we start to think if I rip that drink out of my hand, like I rip the joy out of the situation. So for me, that was really clear saying, no, it wasn't about the drink, right? It never was. It was never about the drink. It was about that connection and that piece of it. And so I think, really misinterpreting my identity as a drinker with the events and the experiences was really key. And that's something I'm still working on, right? We're about to go on a trip at the end of the month. So excited. We're going back to Norway, going to my mom and my brother. So excited. And I'm having these things of like, oh, I've never gone on an international flight and not drank. Like, that's going to be interesting, right? Like, what's it going to be like? Well, I want a glass of wine. And so, but again, knowing it's okay, the flight, I can still enjoy it, right? It wasn't, I love a long haul flight. Like, it's not about the drink. It's not about the drink on the fjord overlooking it. It's about the experiences. But that can really help us to be like, no, I identify as somebody who enjoys those, but I don't have to have a drink. And again, this is something that still kind of comes up for me when I think about those. Number two is that when we want to do something that's going to threaten our identity, right? We always focus on, we tend to focus as humans on what we're going to lose, not what we're going to gain. Because we know what it feels like. And the thought of like taking that out, again, ripping it away, ripping this security blanket away, ripping out, like can feel really scary because we don't know what the unknown is going to be. We don't know, am I not going to be fun? Will my friendships change? Will I be able to handle my emotions? Like we don't know. And it feels really scary. And one thing that came up for me on this identity threatened is I still have like a love for that woman who I was, right? Like she was doing amazing things. She had amazing experiences. Like it almost feels sometimes when you start to change, you're like, I don't want to say that was bad per se, because it would discount like the woman she was trying to be. But I can also show kindness and love for her and choose to do something different, right? So when we get threatened, we can get really defensive, right? Of like defensive and scared. So we don't know what it's going to look like, right? We can think, oh my goodness, like why now, if I'm not a drinker, who am I? Like, who am I at these events if I'm not the fun loving, outgoing person? And, that was a real legitimate fear. I knew I was fun because I thought I was fun beforehand and I'm always outgoing. And I don't think I used it as like a coping mechanism for that. But I was really curious, right? Well, like, would I get more like high strung in a situation? How would it affect my relationships? And, this was a big one I had in my partner or my relationship with my wife, we talked about, right? Because I remember it so clearly, right? We've always drank together, right? On trips. And again, neither of us has ever gotten out of control, all those things. It's so clear to me. I remember sitting there, she sat on the couch and she was like, is this like who you are now? Is this like what you're going to do? And at that point I was probably 3 or 4 months in, and knowing that she was worried, like, what do we shift as a couple? Like, how does that change our dynamics? Right. And I was like, I don't know what this looks like. I know that I want to experience it. I know that I'm hoping we can still do the same things we've done. I just do one without a drink, but like, I don't know. And so it's totally normal for you to have those fears, whether it's with a partner, with its friends, with its family, coworkers. So it can change, right? Because your relationships, it's like giving time for people to catch up. You're somebody who drinks and you're not anymore. Okay, well, that's interesting. Okay, things shift a little. I went to a girls' trip last weekend. It was the first girls' trip I've done when I haven't, and I did have a glass of wine. Felt totally, glass and a half, felt totally great about it. Intentional, woke up the next day, felt great. But kind of changing, right? No, I'm not a drinker, but I'm still here and I'm still here for fellowship and fun. Which really brings me to my third piece of this identity piece. And identity talks about like the values that creates oneself. And whenever I quit drinking, my values didn't change, right? They were just more aligned. Because when I was drinking a lot, like I wasn't living the values that were important to me, right? Which my values are really like connection, experiences, freedom. I wasn't really living those. Like maybe it looked like on paper, but I wasn't connecting with myself, with people in like a really personal way because there was like this booze haze, right? I was having the experiences, but maybe not fully present, or I wasn't having experiences that scare me that I wanted to do because I didn't have the courage to do it because I was drinking. And the freedom, I felt so trapped by booze. And so I thought my identity would change, right? I'm like, oh, it's like my identity, but it was never about that. Like what I thought, my identity was still there. And when I stepped into this place of alignment, right, of also values like health and high achieving and intentionality, and I based my drinking decision on that, then it was in full alignment. And I was like, oh, that's my identity. I'm somebody who shows up for herself, right? Drinking was never who I was. It was just something I did, right? But we can equate that, right? And, I'm still the same person. Maybe, I've never wanted to stay up late. Like I still like to be funny. I still like to make people feel comfortable. I still like to have experiences, but now I'm fully aligned with identity of who I want to be. Because it was so much identified as a drinker because it was social and it was something we did. But when I removed that, everything else was still there, right? Like the core of who I am, the core of who I was, the core of who I want to be was there. But again, these are areas where this identity can come up, right? And who am I if I'm not a drinker, right? Like what all shifts in my life? And that can feel really, really, really overwhelming. But again, the purpose of this is coming back to like trusting the knowing, trusting the whisper, trusting that what is coming up for you about changing your relationship with alcohol is worth more than the shift in identity. We're we're supposed to shift as we grow, right? We are not the same people we were when we were 7, 17, 27, 37. Like we grow and identities shift, but like it's coming back to like what's important for you. Like who do you want to be known as? And how does alcohol play a piece in that? Because for me at this point in my life, like who I want to be and the woman I want to show up as cannot be aligned with somebody who drinks a lot. It just can't. And the more I step into that, the more I realize I don't even want that anymore. But again, I know when I started this journey and for the years before, it can be really scary. So I'm just sharing that to think this may be a reason you're not quitting drinking, right? Like, who am I? What shifts in my relationships? And yeah, your relationships may change. You may have friendships that don't last, but are those friendships you want in your life, right? Like we grow, we evolve, and no fault to anybody else, but things change. So I guess I just leave you with this. If you're somebody and this is like, oh yeah, this feels right for me. This is something I'm struggling with. Really trying to think of like, who at your core are you, right? What are your values? What's important to you? What are the type of relationships you want to have, experiences you want to have, memories you want to have? Like, what are those? And does drinking serve those? When you drink, are you able to have those moments? Because so often I find in my life, I can't. They are in conflict, right? And I know for my identity, I want to be in pure alignment with my values and my intentions and who I want to be. And for me, drinking does not like get to like really play a role in those. So thank you for tuning in. Next week will be the final myth, or the next video of this series will be the final myth, which is a big one. And it's why I started this podcast. It's why I started this YouTube. It's why I started all the things I'm doing with Sober Uprising. So that'll be a good one. So thank you for tuning in. Please give me a like, a share, a review, send it to somebody you know is maybe sober curious or just you've had conversations with, right? The more we can talk about this, the more we normalize doing something a little different with our alcohol consumption, that can change our lives. So thank you for tuning in. And remember, everything you want is on the other side of saying no to that drink.